Off, we have Levi, right? Yes.
Thank you all for being here today. My name is Levi Kruger and I am a student at Orchard Hill. It is my pleasure to call to the podium Dr. Benjamin Forsyth. He will give you the official welcome. Dr. Forsyth is the Associate Dean at the College of Education here at the University of Northern Iowa. He coordinates undergraduate studies in the College of Education and helps to lead the educator preparation program across campus. We are very thankful to have Dr. Forsyth to kick off the conference today.
Thank you very much, Levi. Hello, everyone. My name is Benjamin Forsyth, Associate Dean of the College of Education here at UNI. I have the pleasure today of welcoming you to our 5th annual Social Emotional Learning Conference. It's great to have you here. Each year, we are so excited for you all to partake in this event. As we know, the knowledge you gain here will have a ripple effect across the communities that you serve and our neighboring states and among the children and families you connect with today, tomorrow, and into the future. Thank you for all that you do. Today, we have a wonderful lineup of keynote speakers and guest breakout presenters. But before we get started, I want to recognize the generosity of passionate people who love children and believe in the values of social and emotional learning. Their support has made this wonderful opportunity for learning and connection possible. Today, we have one of those donors with us. Could Dr. Judith Finkelstein please stand and stay standing to be recognized? Dr. Judy Finkelstein has been part of the UNI family since 1950. She has attended what was then known as the Iowa State Teachers College, secured her master's degree here, and taught at the Malcolm Price Lab School on campus for over 20 years. She first recalls gaining a deeper sense and understanding of social emotional learning during the summers of 1965 and 1966, when she was chosen as a Head Start teacher in Cedar Falls. That experience specifically confirmed her belief in the importance of fostering social and emotional learning in young children. Her passion for SEL remained strong as a faculty member on campus in the late 1980s. Judy submitted a proposal to the Dean of the College of Education for an early development education center, which would focus on all 4 areas of learning: physical, social, emotional, and intellectual. In 1988, the Iowa legislature mandated that such a center be created and housed at UNI, and Judy was selected to be the founding director. This center still exists today in Schindler Education Center, room 116, and you can tour there during lunch today if you wish. My kids go in there all the time. They love to play with the things in there. They just have to put the stuff away when they're done. Judy taught college courses on this campus for 20 years, mostly for the early childhood endorsement. She offered summer workshops here for teachers and took her passion on the road to present to local, state, and national professional groups. Judy retired in 2009, and in 2022, she received the UNI President's Distinguished Award for Alumni Service. In 2023, she was chosen as the UNI Homecoming Parade's Grand Marshal. She continues to be active with the Iowa Regents Center for Early Developmental Education and the Price Lab Historical Committee. Thank you, Judy, for your generous donation to the conference today and for the many years of devotion to growing strong, socially and emotionally aware children and teachers. Your work is highly valued and appreciated. Let's all give Judy another big round of applause. All right. You are all here to see 2 great keynotes who will be introduced shortly. These keynotes are sought after and carefully chosen by our conference planning team. Can the members of the planning team please rise to be recognized? Nikki Score, Carrie Clopton, Denise Talixon, Amy Curley, and Sunny Kagabine. These members and several other volunteers will be wearing blue shirts today and can assist with any questions you may have. After this keynote portion of the event, they will be escorting you over to the Schindler Education Center, where you'll have breakout sessions and lunch. Don't hesitate to engage these volunteers if you have any questions today. Last but not least, this year we also have Leader Valley as a partner. Leader Valley is a local organization that currently partners with 31 schools and 10 districts. Their organizational mission is centered around changing lives through leadership. As an organization, they focus on two key areas: strengthening the current talent pool by offering leadership programming and supporting the development of future leaders by helping students build essential, future-ready skills. This work is often carried out through their Leader in Me program, which some of you may already be familiar with. As you've noted, some excellent Leader in Me students are helping us with introductions. You met Levi, there will be a couple more. Without further ado, I'm going to hand the microphone over. Thank you for being here and for the great work that you all do, and have an inspiring day.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Malia Begich, and I'm a student at Orchard Hill. I'm here to introduce you to the first keynote speaker, Dr. Stephanie M. Jones. Stephanie M. Jones is the Gerald S. Lesser Professor of Early Childhood Development at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she is director of the Easel Lab and co-director of the Saul Zaentz Early Education Initiative. She was recently appointed the faculty director of the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. Stephanie is a developmental psychologist trained in child development, prevention science, and social policy. Her work is transactional and translational, using rigorous studies of learning settings, family systems, and the practices and policies that shape child well-being from infancy through early adolescence to build knowledge of human development and context, and then applied research to transform the settings in which child learn and play. By conducting rigorous longitudinal studies of such strategies and practices, she engages in an evidence-action cycle that is intended to grow knowledge about social, emotional, and behavior development and context. Her research is published in academic and educational journals, as well as in trade publications, and she regularly presents her work to national and international academic, policy, and practitioner audiences. We're excited to have Stephanie here with us today, so let's welcome her to the stage.
What a great job. Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you. I have many things to say before I even start, which is my own sort of regulatory issue, which is a social and emotional skill. So we're all learning them all the time and practicing them. So I have a whole bunch of slides, and I love making PowerPoint slides and lots of animations in them. And we've had some computer fun this morning, so I'm not sure exactly how they're going to look or what's going to happen with them. So some will look a little crazy, and you will be wondering if that was intentional or just because of the computer fun this morning. So please forgive some of those slides. They might look a little weird. I am completely delighted to share the slides with you if you would like them, just to have them and look through them. So the other thing that's interesting is that I have readers on, so I can see this, but I can't use them to read over there. So I'm just going to take them on and off, and you'd think I'd get glasses that worked by this time. So let's see what happens. Okay, I also have a big plan. So the plan includes really two main things. So first I'm going to talk just a tiny bit about the Easel Lab and what we do. Then I'm going to talk about the science of social and emotional learning. I have this feeling that many of you already know much of this science, so I will go through it quickly. And in doing that, I'll talk about sort of what the skills are. We'll talk a little bit about how they progress developmentally and what that means for what we're thinking about in different learning settings. I'll talk about the evidence that we have to date about the importance of social emotional skills and the impact of the strategies and practices that we have available to us on those skills. And that's like 50 years of evidence all boiled into 5 or 7 minutes. And then the second thing is I'll turn to what we know about effective practice. And I'll talk a bit about social emotional learning programs and a lot about our approach in the EASL Lab to practice, which is something called social emotional learning kernels. And this is work we've been doing with partners across the US, but in other countries. And in service of honoring our partners in Ukraine, I thought I would just tell you a little bit about our work with them, which gives you a sense of how far-reaching social emotional learning work is and how powerful it is in situations of everyday, but also of extreme crisis and conflict. And then questions. So my plan, we'll see I tend to go over. So my plan was to stop with 20 minutes for questions. And so when we get to that point, I might just stop and then we'll have questions. So here we go. Okay, so the EASL Lab, as you heard a little bit in the introduction, I'm a developmental psychologist, but also I've been trained in prevention science. And the core idea of prevention science is that we bring what we know into conversation with what we do. And really, most importantly, that we spend time in applied settings, so really living inside what we do, that then informs what we learn, right? So we're building our evidence base from practice, from the questions that are inside the field. And so in the EASL Lab, that's kind of what we try to do. EASL stands for Ecological Approaches to Social and Emotional Learning, which no one really ever says, but it has an important message. The message is that social and emotional learning, social and emotional development, social and emotional skills are deeply ecological, right? They're not just about what young people or young children can and can't do. It's really about the conditions and the features of settings that foster their development. So we try really hard to hang on to this idea that social emotional learning work is deeply rooted in settings and not just inside individuals. Okay, so in the EASL Lab, we do 3 things. We're researchers. I'm a developmental psychologist, as you heard, and as I said, and because of that, I do big long-term studies, so where we follow samples of young children as they grow and develop over many, many years. And our interest is really in trying to understand really deeply how do social, emotional, and behavioral skills and all the things that are connected to that whole domain, how do those progress developmentally? What are the kinds of things that happen in young people's lives that shape those developmental trajectories? So that's one part of that work. We often do studies that last, 10 to 20 years. The other side of the work is to say, well, given the practices and strategies that have been developed in the field, what do we know about whether or not they're effective, right? And if they're not effective, what's standing in the way? And so we do a lot of research that's developmental in nature, but also sort of program evaluation kind of work. And often those happen together. This is the part that's super fun, and that I really, in my career, was not trained to do, but have spent most of my time doing now, which is to say, what does the evidence tell us about what's needed in the field? And then, what do practitioners in the field, who are the experts on the field, tell us is needed in the field? And then we work with partners around the globe to respond to those needs and co-design strategies and practices that are intended to support children and adults' social and emotional skills. And we do research, co-design research projects. We learn about those efforts, and you'll hear more about that. And then we also do the things that we do, like we write papers and we create resources for the field. We've written a number of guides to social emotional learning programs, one of which I'll just highlight as we go on. We have a number of websites that are focused on the frameworks that define the skills in the field and connect them to each other. We try and both directly, indirectly, and all the other ways we can advocate for the importance of this body or this domain of development inside learning settings. And that's the EASL Lab. Okay, so first to the science. So what are the skills? And I feel like this set of findings here are not going to really be a surprise to anyone in this room, but I do think it is a little bit jarring to see how challenging things are out there in the world. And so there are a number of surveys, national surveys of teachers in the US, and they happen periodically, and this is one, the Pew Research Center 2023 survey of teachers, and in this case, teachers are reporting that, or 50% of teachers report that behavior in their settings, the behavior they're observing of children across grades, is only fair or poor. I don't think that that was a total surprise or a complete change since the pandemic, but the pandemic has really made it more acute. In this case, same survey, 82% of teachers say the pandemic has had a lasting negative impact on children's behavior, and I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. And then third, this is from the Child and Adolescent Health Measurement Initiative. This is just showing us that a large number of young people are being diagnosed with a mental, emotional, or behavioral disorder. So all of you are certainly aware of this, but like cast your mind into the classroom and into the role of that educator in that room and think about how challenging that is for that educator, but also for all the other children in that setting. It's very disruptive, it's very challenging, and that challenge cascades into many, many different things. So often lately, I've been, instead of putting social and emotional skills matter in school, I know everybody's wearing a t-shirt that says that, which I learned last night. I would have changed my slides immediately at that moment, but I didn't. So sometimes I have to say non-academic skills matter. It's the same thing, as you know. So I'm painting a sort of grim story, but it's not all that grim. We have something that works, and we have information about that thing that is built up over many, many decades. Building up social and emotional skills makes a difference for young people and for adults. And so when we think about what are those skills actually, one of the things that I find in most of the meetings that I go to is that the first question that often derails the whole meeting is like, well, so what are the skills? Are they the skills that the Castle framework defines? Are they the skills that the OECD framework defines? Are they the skills that the Character Lab defines? Are they the skills that are embedded in the standards that every single state has that are focused on social, emotional, behavioral skills or character? Like, what are they? And can we just agree on one set and get on with it? And that question, that last one, just stops everything. Everybody starts to fight. It feels like it's not really a social emotional learning meeting because people can't figure it out or get along. So this is a question that we grapple with all the time. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time here and give you my point of view. So cast your mind into any one of these rooms. I know that many of you are early childhood educators or administrators. Some of you are probably from elementary settings. Some of you are probably from middle and high school settings. I imagine some of you are doing work in professional learning or professional development. So any one of those settings and those pictures up there depict a learning activity that is specific to that setting and expected by everybody in that setting. So in early childhood, a classic learning activity, like a quote academic activity, is sitting in a group with an educator who is reading a story. And in that situation, the children are, in that tiny little picture, they are laser focused on that story. And what they're trying to do is link the words that they're hearing to the words on the page and make sense of the story and the picture that they're shown, right? That's a very basic foundational literacy activity. In an adolescent youth classroom, you might have a bunch of kids who are sitting at desks, and an educator is up at the front writing down a formula for like something in algebra. Forgive me. I'll just say something in algebra. And they're listening, and they're looking at their book, and they're trying to make sense of what they're hearing up there in relation to that book and understand that formula deeply, right? Educators sitting in a group who are doing professional learning in the breakout sessions later today, sitting in a circle, talking together, spending time listening, sharing, trying to understand a practice or a concept or get inside the work in one way or another. In this room, you're all sitting with your attention focused on me, on the slides up here. These are all learning activities. So if your head is inside that learning activity and putting yourself inside that individual, that little child, in that group with other kids, what do they have to do to hear the word, see the word, imagine the setting, right, in that picture, and go on to the next thing with all of that in their head? What do they have to do? It's really very basic. They have to be able to focus their attention, right? Focus it right there and shift it then to something else. That's necessary to being successful in any one of those activities. They need to be able to manage their behavior, right? So those of you who know young children, 5-year-olds sitting too close to each other, right? There's a lot of this, and that sets people off. So that disrupts the learning moment. So those young children need to learn, figure out, how am I going to hold it together, right? So it's not distracting me from hearing that word and seeing it connected to the word on the page. They have to build and have positive relationships, right? Feeling safe in the classroom is not an inconsequential thing. So establishing a feeling of connection to the adult, trust with that adult, some security that you are welcome there, that what you bring into that room is welcomed by that teacher, that you belong. Same is true with the other kids in that room. So building positive relationships, and then understanding and dealing with feelings. I was once in a sort of indirect conversation with a political person, I won't say who, about whether or not emotions are relevant to math. And that person, I felt, was shouting about how emotions were not relevant to math. Was very emotional about it. Feelings are everywhere, positive and negative, like all the feelings. We have them all the time. They don't go away. We don't choose to have them or not. And they inflect learning, right? They sit inside and inflect how we acquire information. So positive emotions can really motivate and accelerate learning. Negative emotions can sometimes stand in the way. It's not as simple as all that, but they're just deep inside it. So the case, I don't think I need to make to you, but the case that sometimes needs to be made, and I invite you to, if you want the slides, to use them for the case you're making, is that learning is not separate from these things. These things are deeply inside of learning. They are how learning happens. So just as the starting point for all of us, I hope that we can all agree that there is no choice here. It's not that we choose to focus on social and emotional skills, choose to support them or not, because they are happening. And if we're going to really optimize learning environments, support young children, medium-sized children, old children, adults, my husband, all of them, and educators, we're going to have to take this seriously. And we have to talk about it in ways that everyone can hear. So that said, this is one of the crazy ones. It's supposed to have like very carefully written words and all sorts of things on there. So that said, there are a lot of frameworks, as I mentioned, that shape how we design practices and strategies. They shape how we do research. They get deep inside policymaking, right, with choices about specific school skills embedded in different kinds of policies. There was a moment when, maybe it was 10 years ago, when everybody was really just losing their minds over grit, right? Grit was on people's minds. People understood it to be sort of a foundational social and emotional skill, and it found its way into the National Assessment of Education Progress. It was inside legislation. So these words and what they mean really do matter in those sectors, which is why spending some time inside the framework morass is important. Here is the schema that I tend to use to guide my own work. In the EASL lab, we spend a lot of time worrying about frameworks and terminology, and so we have tried to adopt and define a framework that we think brings or offers a big tent and brings in lots of ways of thinking about these skills. And this is one of them. And you can't see it, but in the middle, there is a kind of inner ring. And that inner ring describes specific cognitive, emotional, and social skills that support learning. I just talked about a bunch of them. Attention, cognitive flexibility, those are core kind of cognitive skills. Response inhibition, sometimes people call those executive functions. Those are the sort of central foundational cognitive skills. There's, of course, a whole set of emotion skills: empathy, emotion knowledge and expression, emotion and behavioral regulation, and then a bunch of social skills, things like conflict resolution, cooperation, reading, nonverbal social cues. I saw someone doing that just before, going like this, which is exactly what that is. So they're kind of core emotional, cognitive, and social competencies. And then in the middle ring, did that come up? Okay. In the middle ring, we have something that a colleague of mine coined as the belief ecology. And this is a set of things that you might imagine sort of stand between those core skills and action in the world, right? It's a set of beliefs about yourself, about the world, mindsets that shape how you think about yourself and about the world, the values that you have that guide your action. Those are all in that middle ring. And then, of course, we have this outer ring, which is like all the stuff that happens in the environment. Interactions, relationships, features of settings, all of the stuff in the sort of micro, meso, macro system to bring in Bronfenbrenner's way of thinking about these things, and this is a ring that looks like that. So that's how in the EASL lab we talk about the skills, and we use a framework like this to help us think about, okay, what are the essential practices that affect each of these specific kinds of skills? Okay, second part of this. Social and emotional behavioral skills are developmental. They emerge. We are not born with them. They emerge, they grow, and change over time. There's not a lot of developmental, really clear, I would say, maybe you have one that you would share, developmental frameworks that really tell us what are the really important skills for 4- and 5-year-olds. And then what do those skills lead to for 6- and 7-year-olds and 8- and 9-year-olds? And how should I focus my work based on a kind of notion of developmentally salient or important skills for different ages? Like what? I can't do everything. And not all things are relevant. So where should I really focus? And so in the EASL lab, we developed a kind of map of social and emotional skills from early childhood through adolescence. And the idea is something like this, which is that in early childhood, this is like 3, 4, 5, there's a foundational set of skills that emerge first, and they grow rapidly during this period. This is where we see those sort of core executive functions and self-regulation skills. So in that cognitive domain, we have things like cognitive flexibility, response inhibition, which is just a version of sort of early self-control or self-regulation, attention control, working memory. In the emotion domain, we have just very basic emotion skills. So learning what emotions are, learning what it looks like when you're showing one kind of emotion or another, and then sort of basic emotion and behavioral regulation. In the social domain, we have basic social engagement. So learning about what it's like to be in a room with a whole lot of other people your age, and what happens when you interact with them. This is like very foundational stuff. The idea here is that this sets the stage for a set of more complex skills in the next round, right? So this is 7, 8, 9 or so. And in the cognitive domain, we have things like planning, organizing, setting goals. So imagine that third grader is suddenly in charge of their own backpack, right? That kid needs to remember what goes in it at the end of the day. And then when they get home, remember to take it out and do something with it, and then put it back in and bring it back. That's a really sort of core skill for a third grader, and they're not good at it, right? Because they're learning this part. But it takes working memory, it takes some response inhibition, like I gotta open it up and take it out even though I just wanna turn on the TV or whatever it is. It takes those foundational skills to be able to do that well. Empathy and perspective taking are in the emotion domain, as salient in this period, and you can imagine for a child who is learning to take the perspective of another, they need to be able to read the emotional expression of someone else, right? They need to have had some social experience, right? Those are the foundations to that more complex perspective taking. Over in the social domain, this is where really learning about and trying to read and get accurate in understanding the nonverbal cues of others. This is a really core skill to lots of behavioral stuff that comes later. And then finally, following along this same idea, just showing one side of it, the social domain, we have more sophisticated prosocial behavior, cooperation, conflict resolution. So imagine what it takes for a fifth grader to resolve a complex social conflict. They need to take perspective, they might need to have some empathy, they need those foundational cognitive skills. It all builds up. The reason that a map like this is helpful, I think, is that if you're working with a fifth grader who really is struggling in those conflict situations, you might say, okay, what are the roots of this? And what are the strategies I can deploy in this setting to build up those roots, to get that child to conflict resolution without starting in the most complex place? So these kinds of things can operate like a map to practice or intervention. So because we have a obsessive quality in our lab, we made a bunch of versions of this, and I can't read that even standing right here with it right in front of me. You certainly can't read it, but I have a bunch of PDFs of these, and I am happy to share them with you. The idea here is that we could get very specific about what's important, what's relevant developmentally at these different ages, and focus our attentions there. One thing I have noticed about some of the social emotional learning approaches that are on the market is that they kind of have everything in there all the time. And I think that that's overwhelming for educators. And so I think something like this can help us get a little focused and really dig in on those age-relevant skills. Here's just a close-up. It's another version of this PDF if you want it. I'm happy to share it with you. And it just unpacks the specific skills in these different age bands. One of the things that we have observed over the last 6 years is that teachers are telling us that their students are operating or behaving socially and emotionally about 2 years behind where they expect them to be. And that is just a thing. I'm going to come back to this in a moment. And I think what is really important about that, and what's important about a map like this, is that we can say, okay, this pandemic happened. It is having an influence, no matter what anybody tells you, on how kids are doing, how adults are doing. So let's reset our developmental expectations, right? Because if we don't, we're going to expect something of children that they cannot do, and that leads to consequences for them that are really challenging, and a challenge especially to their developmental path. So I offer this as like, okay, let's reset and think about where they might be 2 years ago now, and think about them this way, and sort of shift our expectations with that in mind. Okay, last thing here is that I did talk a fair amount about the skills, and it's because I do worry about this, and I invite you to these two websites if you're interested in this issue. One is called Explore SEL, and the other is called the PSS SEL Toolbox. And I'll tell you quickly the difference between them. One was first, the second was second. There's some more differences, but it's so complex, and we're working on a project right now to merge them. The core idea is that each offers a set of data tools that essentially represent a project that we did to code frameworks so that we could connect them to each other. So for those of you who are working in a system where there is a social and emotional learning approach in preschool that adopts a framework that is preschool oriented, but you're collaborating with your colleagues who are working in an elementary setting, and they've adopted a different framework. And suddenly you're left with this, like, wait, is this going to make it confusing for all of us who are trying to think about children developmentally and set them up for what's coming next? Or when they're in that next stage, think about what they were focused on before they came here. Something like this can help you see where frameworks that use different words to refer to the same things line up, right? And where they don't. Where they use the same word to refer to different things, where they line up. So I invite you to use these if they help. Okay, so that's the whirlwind of what are the skills over development, and a bit of the kind of framework stuff. So now I'm going to turn to the evidence. And this, as I said, is really truly, it's a lot of evidence boiled into just a small number of slides. And so there's a lot out there, and I'm certainly not going to do it justice. But I wanted to make some high-level points that I hope all of you will then share and communicate about, because they do offer something that I think is unusual, which is that in the world of social emotional learning, there is more research. There are more RCTs. There is more information about what works than in, I would say, any other domain. There is maybe literacy. There is so much yet out in the world of policy. For those of you who are intersecting with policymakers, one of the first sort of, statements that comes out is like, well, we don't really know anything about how this stuff works. And I would say, like, no, that is absolutely not true. We have so much information. So this is the information. So there are three kinds of studies. The first are long-term correlational studies. And these are studies that folks have undertaken where they follow a sample, starting with young children. They follow them for 20 to 30 years. There's like a handful of these. They're growing in number. But they really give us some clear information about what comes later. And so here's just an example. Imagine you have in childhood, on the one hand, you have academic skills, and on the other hand, you have non-academic skills, social and emotional skills. And then 20 to 30 years later, it's not academic stuff, it's life outcomes, right? So these are things like having a job, going into and through higher education, being physically healthy, mentally healthy, not engaging in substances, having some personal finance stability, and not being engaged or involved in the criminal justice system. Those are the life outcomes that people in society agree are essential to a functioning civil society, right? So this handful of studies tell us that if you look at things like emotional competencies, social skills and problem solving, self-control in early childhood, those factors predict those life outcomes 20 to 30 years later, even after accounting for socio-demographic factors in the middle and all that academic stuff, right? This is a pretty powerful signal about the importance of those skills in predicting life outcomes. It's not causal, but it's a strong signal. And, sorry, I'm losing track of my slides. The other thing is that, when we think about the future labor market and this is an old slide or an old graph, but it's not any less true. What's demanded in the labor market in the future, in addition to all those life skills, are specific things that are fundamentally social and emotional, right? They're people skills, working in teams, managing with unstructured problems, coordinating things that are unknown, right? And doing it in a collaborative effort. I would say that now that we're all talking about AI, that I would replace people skills with human skills right there. So, and that is coming, and that is necessary. These are fundamentally social and emotional things. Okay, second kind of study are those randomized control trials of large-scale programs and practices. So when we get into a school or a system and we randomize classrooms or schools to receive something or not, right? So 20 of the schools get second step and the rest of the schools don't, and they wait until a couple of years later and they adopt it. It's that kind of study. There are so many of these. These are understood to be the gold standard in research, because you randomize, you can say with certainty that the social and emotional curriculum that is implemented in, let's say, the treatment schools causes the changes that we observe. There are 50 or 60 of these studies at least, and they are pretty consistent in showing that when you do a high quality effort, whatever, a curriculum that is designed to influence social and emotional skills, you see improvements in those skills at levels that are not tiny, right? At meaningful levels. The second lesson from this set of studies is that you see spillover effects into the academic domain. So when you're implementing something in classrooms that is focused on social and emotional skills, you see an impact on academic outcomes even if you didn't directly do anything about them. This is repeated, this set of findings, so consistently, and there have now been studies of those studies. Those are called meta-analyses, and there have been many of those. And those all show that when you do a high quality effort, something in the social and emotional domain, a curriculum or something in early childhood, elementary, middle school, and high school, you can expect to see changes in those outcomes, and they're not tiny changes. So that's pretty strong, irrefutable evidence. Oh, I'm so behind on the slides. Okay, that's what that says. Then the third, I'm just going to click ahead. The third body of evidence comes from sort of what I used to say 10 years ago, the new neuroscience of stress. It's not new anymore. But what this work really tells us or unpacks for us is how experiences of stress and strain, exposure to adversity and vulnerability influence the developing brain and then cascade into children's behavior. The really important thing about this work is that it gives us a signal, right? It gives us some window into what's happening behind the behavior that we often see in classrooms. And it's really about how children are exposed to and then responding to experiences of stress and strain. What we know from this work is that this body of skills, social and emotional skills, in particular executive function and self-regulation, are very susceptible to experiences of stress. So stress influences those skills in particular. The good news is that, sorry, I'm just gonna catch up with myself. The good news is that social and emotional learning work, interventions, strategies, and practices make a difference in interrupting that cycle, which is part of the reason that social and emotional learning work has been adopted and is central to a lot of the efforts in situations of extreme vulnerability, like situations of conflict, crisis, displacement, and war. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of this. And this is a paper that just came out a few weeks ago from a study called the Early Learning Study at Harvard. We started it in 2017 with 5,000 3 and 4-year-olds and their families, and focused in particular on the early learning and care settings where they were learning. And we followed that sample until they were 11 and 12. And as you all know, the pandemic happened in Massachusetts. As it turns out, everything in the state, so this study was conducted in Massachusetts, everything in the state in Massachusetts shut down on the same day, basically, over like a Friday and into the weekend. And everybody went home, everybody. And we continued our study. And in this graph, we are showing children's executive function, which is, as I've said over and over, is like one of those core skills, core social and emotional skills in the cognitive domain. It is one of those sets of skills that are highly susceptible to experiences of stress and strain. And so what this graph is showing you is the children's age across the bottom, and our sample was about 6 and 7 when everything shut down in the state. And that's represented by the red line and the red vertical line. The red line on the left-hand side are children's executive function skills captured with the direct assessment called the Minnesota Executive Function Scale before those shutdowns. And that red line is slightly above the black line, which are the national norms that are available for this assessment. So in Massachusetts, which is a relatively high-income state, children's scores were slightly above the national norms, which is what we would expect, because income and challenges with income track closely with executive function. What we see, and I haven't heard everybody gasp, but it's okay. I did when I saw this. What we see on the right-hand side, that blue line, are children's executive function scores using the same direct assessment post-shutdowns. And that sort of average level drops by about half a standard deviation and persists until a few years later. And when, because of the nature of the pandemic, those national norms were not updated until very recently. And so what we're comparing that blue line to are pre-pandemic national norms. So when we're thinking about behavior, right? Behavior today, in particular middle schoolers, we can sort of cast our heads back and say, wow, if children experience similar levels of stress and strain due to shutdowns, social isolation, family strain, which certainly happened, we may understand that behavior in terms of what happened back then. And that's what this picture basically shows. It's a schema that illustrates how understanding pandemic impacts really depends on how we understand children at the age of that experience, right? So for us, they were 6 and 7 in our study. They were just entering into kindergarten, some of them. They were in their second half of their first year of schooling, somewhere in the second half of their second year of schooling. So understanding pandemic impacts depends on that, but also the sort of the relevant developmental task and all of the kind of history of experience that led up to it. And in this case, the way we understand the data that I just showed you is that it's linked to how adults are seeing kids today. And it helps us think, gosh, what are we going to do about this, right? One thing we could do is go back and say, how might we support those foundational executive function skills for our sample in a middle school way, right? Because they're now in middle school, and that's when their behavior is showing up. So anyway, that's I think a way to think about how we can use some of this evidence to think about and understand what we're seeing among kids and among adults, and then map a plan to do something about it. Okay, so the last thing is just something that I've been thinking about in a kind of communicative sense, but also a way to I don't know, reconceptualize how foundational or communicate about how foundational these skills are. And so I was thinking about all of the important settings for child and youth development: sports, health, culture, arts, school, home, family, work. You can list a whole lot of things. And each of those experiences has these really important technical outcomes, right? In sports, you might learn, we were just talking about baseball. You learn, what do you learn in baseball? You learn how to watch the ball to the bat. That's what I heard, everybody yelling to my son. That's a specific technique to baseball, right? In health, you learn about healthy eating or healthy behaviors, and you have access to care or not. In culture and arts, you learn about the fine arts and the techniques associated with that. That's all sort of technical. On the other side, it's something that I would describe as adaptive. These are like cross-cutting skills. They're social and emotional skills, and they come out of all of those experiences in all of those settings where technical skills are learned. And they're, as we talked about, all kinds of things: communication, teamwork, healthy coping, emotion awareness, reasoned I don't love responsible decision-making, so I say reasoned decision-making. Agency, cooperation, persistence, and so on. And it is those skills that actually drive into long-term outcomes, right? Even as you might hang on to those technical skills as well. I don't know that my son, who's now 19, is thinking about the ball to the bat, right? But there might have been something very specific that was built with those skills. But absolutely, he learned about teamwork. And that carries to his teamwork in college when he has to write a paper or do a group project, right? That carries to the future, those adaptive skills. All right, now I'm going to turn to what we know about effective practice. I'm looking at my phone for the time. Okay, so as you might imagine from my obsessive talking about frameworks, in the EASL lab, we also really are focused on trying to understand across the wide array of possible practices what joins them together to make them effective. So one thing we've done to guide many projects that I'll talk about is we've gotten all the programs. We have purchased them, we've gotten them through a cooperation with their publisher, and we have looked at every aspect of every single one to try and understand, for many different reasons, what is common. What's common to effective practice? And what we've learned is that it's really two key things. On the one hand, high quality developmental relationships that are embedded in safe and caring learning settings. And those relationships are responsive, they are consistent, they are supportive, and they are warm. The second key aspect of what makes practice effective is instruction, right? It is actually just teaching social and emotional skills directly, ideally in ways that offer agency and choice to educators, but also to students when there are lots of opportunities to practice, right? So what all of that, I imagine, is indicating to you is that the instructional work is integrated into the other work, right? That's what lots of opportunities to practice means. And the hallmarks of that effective practice is that adults are modeling the skills that they hope to see, adults are teaching them directly, adults are noticing and identifying opportunities to practice them, and there is a language of the work in the setting. How are you feeling today? I'm feeling a little anxious. Are you feeling anxious? You know, that's a language of social and emotional skills, very simple. The other thing is that we've learned is that characteristics of effective approaches in general is that they are short. They're targeted. There are lots of opportunities to practice. They get progressively more difficult or demanding. They happen in this supportive and engaging environment. They are rooted in social interactions. This one I want to really hang on to. They don't really grow through apps. They're rooted in an in-person, back and forth interaction with a human. And then adults are really, really important supports, which demands that we think about how are we supporting adults. Okay, so what I mentioned before is that a lot of the work in social emotional learning looks like this. It is curricular, it's embedded in programs that have a scope and sequence, that have training, sometimes they have coaching that go with them. They are complex. And there are many, and they have been studied, and there is evidence about those. That's what the work typically looks like. So now I'm going to, in an unregulated way, do a little bit of a sidebar. I threw this in at the last minute, just in case you're interested in the programs as programs. There is a guide. We wrote a guide to social emotional learning programs for pre-K, elementary, and then a second one for middle school and high school. And it's not unlike the Castle Guide, although we don't rank them or rate them or anything like that. It's different in that we spend a lot of time coding the programs in order to show what their relative emphasis is in the program. Are they really focused on the social domain? Do they include information or activities that are about values? Or are they kind of spread across all the areas? And so on. And these guides go into hyper detail about those things. So I'm just going to give you a sense of that. So there are many chapters in them. In the most recent versions of the guide, if you're interested, there's a chapter on equity, there's a chapter on trauma-informed practice. I wanted to highlight a couple of things in particular, which is these set of tables that sort of look across the programs, not in an evaluative way, but in a kind of, this program focuses here, these focus here, not to compare them in a way that says one is better than the other. So chapter 5 and chapter 6 do this. Chapter 5 offers all of these kind of summary tables, and chapter 6 is the program profiles, and I'm just going to give you a sense of what those look like. So here's one of those summary tables, and it highlights each program on the edge, and then along the top are all of the different types of skills in the broad social and emotional domain lined up with that framework that I showed you at the beginning. And it has the sort of cognitive, emotion, and social domain, and then inside each of those, specific skills. And we basically show here the relative emphasis of each program in each of those areas. And so here, Caring Schools Community, I'm going to read this here, and the Good Behavior Game, they really focus on that social domain a lot. There are others that focus heavily in other places. Second Step, I would say, is one of the programs that we coded that has this kind of broad coverage. It really focuses equally on the social, emotional, and cognitive domains. And then there are others that get into things like values and identity and so on, but not as many. And then we coded the instructional method. So what's the primary instructional method that is used in the activity, that is inside the lesson, that is inside the unit, that is inside the grade? And we did this for a reason I'll describe in a moment. And it just gives you a sense of like, how are people teaching social and emotional skills inside these programs? Are they doing it through high quality children's literature? Are they doing it through role play? Are they using puppets? That kind of thing. It's a window into how might I do my work in my setting. And then I'm just going to jump ahead. And then we look at other program components. So are there elements of the program that focus on issues of equity and inclusion, for example? Are there extensions of the program that can be sent home to parents or bring parents in, and so on? So finally, I'll just get to the profiles. And then each program has a profile that has a snapshot, it's an overview of the program, a summary of the evidence, a table that shows its relative emphasis in these different social and emotional domains, a further obsessive breakdown of that. If you're interested, a heat map for that program that shows its relative emphasis in different skill domains across grades. The reason that I find this helpful is that if you're thinking about how to align your instructional work that is unfolding over the year and across grades, you might think, okay, how am I going to integrate my social emotional learning work with those things, right? And so I can see how this curriculum unfolds over a year in terms of what it's emphasizing and across different grades. And then we have a table in there that shows the particular instructional tools that are used in that program and the program components, and then how to get a hold, does that work? How to get a hold of the program. Okay, that was the sidebar. Back to this. Okay, I ended here by saying that social emotional learning work typically looks this way. It is curricular, and it is often includes a scope and sequence, training, coaching. It is complex to implement. And what we have learned is that out in the world, they are really hard to adopt and implement in the way that they are designed, and really importantly, in the way that they were studied. Right? So when these programs are studied, they're implemented in a way that really lines up with how the program was designed. In the world, it's often very hard to implement that program in that way. The conundrum that raises for us is the reality that if it's not implemented in the way it was studied, we can't necessarily expect to see the outcomes that were observed in that study. That's the challenge. And so the way I think about this is that social emotional learning programs work, right? They're amazing. They do work, but they don't scale. And this is how we have to think about what we're going to do. And this is the kind of the real project that we've been doing in the EASL lab. And so we think about this along a couple of dimensions. The first dimension is resources. So those programs are up at the top of the resource dimension, which is the vertical. They take a fair amount of resources. They take time to do, commitment, buy-in, and they cost money, many of them. I'm not trashing SEL programs. Sometimes people think I am. I'm not. They're amazing. People have invested a lot of really important high-quality work in them. And if they can be adopted and implemented in that way, that's really good. The truth is that in many cases they can't. So on the other dimension, the horizontal, we have flexibility. If adopting an SEL program that has been tested in a particular way, and if we want to see those outcomes, we have to implement it in that way. So they're low on flexibility. And I would say that we need something that is in that other quadrant, which is low resources, high flexibility. And this is where we've been doing work. Our approach is called social emotional learning kernels. And basically what we've done is we took all that coding we did of the programs that went into those guides, that obsessive coding. And we asked of those data, so we turned the social emotional learning curricula into data that we could manipulate. And we asked those data, what are all the strategies that have been coded as targeting emotion regulation? What are they? What are the instructional modalities that are used in those strategies? And how many are there? Are they the same or are they all different? So I'll just give you an example in that process for something like emotion regulation, just focusing on the programs for pre-K and elementary. If you ask the question, what are all the strategies that were coded as targeting emotion regulation, you get 400 different things. When you cull those things into the set that could be theoretically implemented without a big buildup, without being inside of a sequence, you end up with about 200 strategies. When you go back and then read those strategies and ask the question, how many of them are the same, you end up with about 5 to 7. So that told us that there are common elements to these programs. And those common elements are embedded in a system of complexity. And my hypothesis is that those common elements account for the common positive impacts of these programs. And so what we said, let's pull out the common elements. Those are the kernels. And let's design them and make them available to educators and hand to educators the choice to pick what they're going to do, the opportunity to adapt them in ways that make sense for their setting. So this is just an example of those common elements. You know, in absolutely every single program, there is a routine for physiological and behavioral regulation. And when you look at them on the surface, they look kind of different. There's the paths turtle, there is the secure stop and stay cool steps, second step, how to calm down. Mind Up has a kind of mindfulness routine. When you really unpack them, they're all the same. They have 3 steps, which is like notice, calm down, make a choice. And so we thought, let's just make a routine like that. And it doesn't have to be embedded inside of a lot of other things that maybe aren't as necessary if you aren't able to do them. So I invite you to look at this brief that is from that we did for the Wallace Foundation that kind of describes this idea. It has this cute graphic that was our thinking then about how we understand the word kernel to apply to this idea. Okay, so this is what they look like in some of their iterations in our long approach to doing this work. We started with a simpler set that were called brain games that were focused in one domain: executive function and self-regulation. And each one is focused on one specific skill. They each have something that is like the big idea, so that's making the skill explicit, and an activity that is fun and short, and adults and children do it together. And it's an explicit opportunity to practice that skill. And then the third part is that there's a debrief, which is intended to build a kind of metacognition about the skill. So what was it like to play that game together? Or what did you notice when you were thinking about how you were feeling right at this moment? Do dogs have feelings, do you think? Like, it doesn't matter really what the question is, right? It's an opportunity to build connection around a specific activity that we did together. So we've done, we have partnerships all over the world focused on the kernels, and I don't know if you can see, yeah, those little white boxes are actually orange dots. And those are those are the partnerships where we've been working with collaborators in a kind of localizing process to take this idea of kernels and then in a collaborative way redesign them and reimagine them in ways that are rooted in a local setting and a local culture. And so what happens is that you end up with, I'm going to just show you some examples of these kernels that are the same. So it's really the same target skill, a slightly adapted way to practice it. And I want to walk over, but I feel like the sound won't work. I can't really see where these are. So this set is one of the early sets that we designed for Massachusetts, South Carolina, Connecticut, and with partners in California. And then we redesigned them for partners in Nebraska and in British Columbia, Canada. Then we did a project in Lebanon and Niger and adapted the same thing for Lebanon. Here is one region called Parachi in Brazil. And here is Northeast Nigeria. Here is Argentina. Here is another region of Brazil. The Amazonas looks quite different from the first region in Brazil. This is Uganda. This is Estonia. Looks a lot like one of the originals. This is the version that we're working on in Ukraine. And then most recently, another adaptation in Nebraska after school settings. So these are all the same kernel, basically, and they have the same structure, but the language and the look and the feel varies entirely between place. And that offers to the field, I think, and to those who are experts in the field, which is educators, the chance to say, like, what am I focused on in my classroom? What's really important in this setting? And how might I adapt this so it suits what I am working on? Or not. Maybe I'll just use it. But it throws the agency and the choice back to the expert in the classroom. And in this case, it offers a way to ensure that social emotional learning work in a kind of global context is not uniformly and only governed by things that are happening in the global north, which is something that is quite important to those who live in Brazil, right? It makes sense. It's a way to make SEL work localized. The one core thing that comes out of the evidence and allows us to link back to this broad evidence base is that every single kernel everywhere has this 3-part structure. Makes the skill explicit, there is an opportunity to practice it directly, and then there is a conversation about what happened. We have designed kernels types for, these are photographs, some of these are photographs I took in my office on Wednesday afternoon, so they're not good. For infants and toddlers that are really rooted in effective caregiving practices. For preschoolers, which actually the photograph doesn't do the preschool set justice. They actually look like the elementary set, but are for early childhood. For after-school settings, as I just mentioned, for high school, for adults, and then a set that are common between adults and young people as games, as I mentioned before. And then a most recent project that we've been doing with 2 districts in Massachusetts is to integrate social emotional learning and aspects of what is supported as evidence-based in trauma-informed work. And what we're doing there is designing a set that are trauma-informed, that can be universally implemented, and then a complementary set that is designed for school counselors and school psychologists who can implement them in small groups at tier 2 and tier 3. So if anyone wants to partner with us, we would love to do that. That is like one of the frontiers of this work. And then we're doing, just because it's close by, we're doing close by to here, I thought I would say something about it. We're doing a large-scale implementation and sort of co-design project in Nebraska in 21st century community learning centers. So after school settings, because in Nebraska, SEL is not happening in schools so much anymore, but it is really happening in after-school settings. And we went through a process of this kind of co-design where we had staff from 21st century learning centers taking apart the kernels and redesigning them in a way that they felt would suit that particular after-school setting, and have been implementing them with a bunch of supports over 2 years. And we're doing a large-scale study. We have our results from the first year of that study with 30 sites randomized to do the kernels and 30 sites randomized to not do them until the next year. And at the end of that first year, we see not insubstantial improvements in children's attention and impulse control, in their delay of gratification, and in observations of teachers' instructional practices as being more socially and emotionally rooted. So it is 9:41. I was just going to spotlight some of the work in Ukraine, and I can just tell you that this is just an illustration, and I'll do it in 2 minutes, of how this kind of localizing, co-design, redesign work has happened and is making a big difference in Ukraine. So Ukraine, as you might imagine, this is a slide that I put together in a year ago, basically, exactly. Things are much worse. So this was a year ago. The situation there and the state of education has gotten worse even, and children are learning still in some places at home, online, since the start of the pandemic, actually. There are a lot of children who are learning in underground schools that have been built up, and we were approached a few years ago, just after the start of the war, to see if the kernels could be adapted and localized for Ukraine and then situated in all these really very different types of learning settings, and could be deployed as a strategy to help adults and children manage the stress and strain of the war, which is what we have done, and the project is really coming to an end in the next 6 months. So we worked with local educators to localize the concepts, to adapt the materials. We supported them in a kind of train-the-trainer model to train basically every primary level educator in the country over the course of a year. There's lots of different supports that we've designed for them, and we're doing a research study with a local Ukrainian researcher. And in the course of this process, we heard a lot from educators about how it was working. And one educator says, what was memorable is actually that during some of the air raid or some situations that students find themselves really nervous or anxious, they now know how to breathe deeply and actually remember about doing that. So when we go to this shelter, they do that. It's very simple, but it makes a big difference in a crisis moment. So if you're interested, I can give you the URL to the website where all the kernels are housed. They're in English and Ukrainian. And if this doesn't show, there's 60 kernels on this site. It doesn't show one aspect that I think could be of interest additionally, is that we designed a whole set of teacher well-being kernels that are really focused on supporting educators who are in this crisis situation and deserve and need support, but also are relevant to any situation for any adult. So there's a little yellow icon at the top. That's the teacher well-being, and you can go to that, and you can look at these in English too. They have done an incredible process of rolling this out to educators across the country. This slide is slightly outdated. They've now reached 130,000 primary level educators across the country who have all received, in some cases, both an in-person training and an online training, and in many cases, just an online training because they are in a situation of war and can't be in person. And we've been doing a study. It's a basic pre-post teacher survey study who comes with all of its own challenges, but basically the signal from this study is quite strong, which is that teachers are reporting that their students, that they are seeing improvements in all of these social and emotional domains among their students. I think the really important thing about this slide is this quote in the middle. I'll jump to all of them, but it says this. I think this is a lesson for all of us. Some may say, is it the right time today to talk and think about the development of education in Ukraine? So they're understanding this effort is about building the Ukrainian education system, right? Just generally, inside a war or outside of a war. Or only about reconstruction and restoration. But we all know from history that the time of the deepest and most difficult crises is when the most significant transformations in the education system take place. So perhaps now is the time for us to bring into our education what will work in the long term. And what I understand from this is the core message is that there's no better time, right? And why would we wait? And I think that is true for all of us in doing this work. Okay, I went to visit Ukraine in October and saw their every single school, every kindergarten and preschool has a bomb shelter in the bottom of it that parents and teachers built together. That was one of the earliest activities in that country in response to the war, was that local people created these shelters. This is an early childhood setting, and when I was there, the person who was traveling around with us said in the West, which is the west of the country, children are in the air raid shelters one time in the week. And in the East, they are in them more than they are out of them. And this was in October, and this situation itself has changed. So children are learning underground in those kinds of settings. So it's a lesson for us all that we can really do this work and it can make a big difference, irrespective of the conditions around us. Okay, now we're at the end. There were icons on this, a little flower. So the first sort of lesson is social and emotional skills and competencies. They are multifaceted, they are developmental, and they're rooted in connected, supportive relationships and settings. And SEL actually intersects with, aligns with, overlaps with many other fields: mental health, trauma, equity, school safety, what have you. It's not separate from those fields. Approaches that work, that are effective, that we can really hang on to and expect to work, build skills in these very targeted and relevant ways. They are short, they are fun, they are intentional, they're progressive. And they focus on specific social and emotional skills. They're adult, they're child, and they're setting focused. So we could design approaches that work at all of these different levels. And that is the most effective thing we can do. They create feelings of connection, belonging, and trust in the setting. And then I would say the frontier of this work is to think about that scaling challenge and to do something that enables the field to take over the work while hanging to and connected to the evidence. So thank you for listening. And we have 13 minutes for questions. So that's all. Oh, here. Oh, sorry. Okay. I lost track of the slides.
We have microphones on either side if you guys have questions and want to come up and ask questions into the microphone so everybody can hear you and don't have to repeat it. That would be great. Are there questions?
Any question about anything? There's someone standing up. Hi.
All right. What research have you found on implications for pre-service educators who were high schoolers during the pandemic? And as a person who coaches and helps pre-service teachers, I've noticed a difference in their ability also to support young learners. So have you come across research to help us best support?
Yeah. There is research on things like mental health consultation, which has shown having a mental health support or coach in the setting makes a huge difference for educators. This was like pre-pandemic research, and it's been shown in lots of studies to be very, very effective at supporting educators to do their best work. And then often in some of those studies, you see these kind of spillover effects on children's outcomes. I would say, so that's one thing. I would say that thinking about educators in the same way that we think about young children, like what are the challenges that they're facing? And I would offer that graph that showed the decline in executive function, I think you could just substitute the children for the adults. That we all faced a real challenge from the stress and strain that came along with those events that likely, I hate to use the word, degraded our own executive functions and social and emotional skills, our self-regulation. And so I would think about those adults in that way. What are the tools that we might offer them, and what are the engagements that we might deploy with them to build their regulatory skills? And I don't think it has to be complicated. I think it's actually as simple as some of the very simple things that are wrapped up in the kernels. And we do a routine with educators that's called pressure points. And it's just a very simple, I think it's engaging and interesting activity to support educators to notice, to just look inside and notice when in the day things go crazy and they lose control, to be aware of the cognitions that arise in those moments, right? I hate these children, right? People think stuff, like they really do, and those are real things. We all do it. And to come up with a strategy to replace those thoughts with different ones. They're just learning, we're all struggling, or whatever, like a mantra. And it's very simple, but it opens one's eyes to, I sometimes am not in control of myself, and here's something I could just pull into my toolbox when that happens. So I think we have to really take seriously and not demean adults for the things that are really happening to them, and give them supports that help them manage. And they have to be simple to be really workable.
Thank you. This is another pandemic question, so perhaps prepare yourself for that.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about managing expectations for those first few kids that were right in the pandemic.
Yeah.
As we look ahead to the post-pandemic children, should we still, what does it look like, maybe just from your perspective or from, the Colonel's perspective, what expectations should we have for these now post-pandemic generations of children? Should we go back? Should we have an informed? What does that look like?
I don't know. What I do know is that those children who are, who were born after the pandemic, right? The children sort of beyond the ones who were born at the point of the shutdown, they're being supported and served, whatever the right word is, by those who experienced the pandemic, right? So we have to think about them as part of the same complex. And I think we're going to see if there's something about the post-pandemic world and the set of interactions that shape their development that are pandemic influenced because those adults experienced the pandemic. It remains to be seen what their sort of developmental story is. What I really, really worry about is that there's a kind of weird reluctance to focus on the pandemic. So we wrote a report that was like, what? It was a National Academies of Science report. What are the impacts of the pandemic on young children and families? And it was like a committee, and it took a year and lots of work and money, I expect. And it just like fell flat. People just were not interested. It was like, let's all say goodbye to this thing. We all experienced it. It's done. Let's put it in the rear view mirror. Fine. Like if that were true, I would say, great, let's do that. Let's all do that together. It's not done. It is showing up in kids and adults. And so let's face it, right? And use the tools that we know are effective to respond. So I worry, I'll just keep talking, hold on one sec, that there was, during the pandemic, it was like, oh my gosh, teachers, mental health, all this stuff, sort of, it was like, oh my gosh. People were opening their eyes to those phenomena. Social and emotional skills. Parents were like, wow, my kids are such a pain to take care of every single day, all day. And it's hard when I have many things to navigate. Like, it was just like an eye-opening moment. The moment that we kind of got out of that acute time, the gaze shifted so completely to academic gaps. And I would have said, and I tried to, let's put those aside for some time, right? Let's really think about how we're going to support kids socially and emotionally, and the academic stuff will come. And there was no appetite for that. So we're now in a situation where it's still happening, right? And we have to face it.
Hi, Hi.
Hi.
So I'm kind of hearing, based off of your presentation and then the commentary about the pandemic, that there's a lot of systemic factors here, especially in education and SEL. And I hear about like the kernels and how we can bring those into our classroom and our communities, but I kind of ask, how can we as educators and individuals who do care about SEL in ourselves and children, how can we advocate for that, and how can we implement that to our state legislator in our districts and at a federal level?
Yeah, that is a question I don't have a good answer for, because I feel the same pain that I think your comment suggests, which is that it is quite a difficult time to communicate about this work and this domain. I used to start this kind of talk in a very different way than I do now. And I have tried to communicate about this domain in ways that are rooted in the enterprise of learning, right? How do people learn? We're all learning. We all learn things. We learned things. We're using our learning all the time. And try and just make plain that the project of learning, to be successful in school, to be successful in work, to be successful in relationships, demands these very basic things that no one disagrees with. No one ever disagrees with this idea that you have to focus your attention. Like that is, everybody's like, yeah, I know when I'm paying attention and I know when I'm distracted. I know that that's something that makes a difference. So I might suggest, without walking back just the importance of social and emotional skills in their own right, I might think about ways to communicate about them that resonate with the needs and the focus and the desires of legislators, which is often like, how are we going to get kids to do better in school? And so, well, I think deconstructing the activity of learning and saying, well, we can support kids to really focus their attention and manage their behavior, and here's how we do it, without necessarily talking about social emotional learning. It's not a different thing. It's a time period when maybe the deconstructing the work into its basic components is more effective than talking about it as a domain, as an enterprise, as a thing.
Okay, so I'm sorry, just to recap. So what I'm kind of hearing is almost scaffolding these things to legislators so they kind of take the bait, essentially.
And align with their priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah, your priority is to support kids to learn in school. Here's an idea for you. Let's talk about how they learn, and let's think about the things that support those things. So often, I hate to say this, I feel like we talk about skills for learning in life. In Nebraska, skills for learning in life. It's not social and emotional skills. But it's the same. Yes, sorry.
Hi, I had a question that relates to like a social work and a special education aspect of it. When it comes to kids that have MEBs or any other special needs, their approach is going to be a little bit different because it's not a one-size-all-fits mode.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, how do you guys approach it within a social work environment for kids with special needs or in special needs schools environments when you're trying to implement the kernels?
So I'll just start by saying that I think the best of social and emotional learning comes out of work in special education. Like its roots are there, and a lot of the strategies and tools and tactics that are used in those environments are what's in those curricula that are being adopted in other settings. So that said, in our work with the kernels, we haven't yet had a partnership in a specific special needs only setting. But I would say the same principles apply, which is that the kernels are activities, and they can be adapted and localized to suit a setting that is implemented by a social worker or in a particular classroom. The kernels, like as they exist, different versions of them depending on the partnership, but the ones that we've designed for many of the U.S. partners have specific adaptations for special needs settings or children who have learning differences. And so there's an attempt to bridge into those settings, but we haven't yet worked inside one of those settings with partners who are really doing the localizing themselves. Anybody want to? Yes, we would do it.
Thank you so much, and have a good day.
Hi, first I just want to say thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure hearing you. So my question is kind of going along with the COVID generation of students. I feel like this new generation is also very much in like the technological sphere of being online, having Chromebooks, having AI. And I've noticed in my experience that it has worsened their attention and their emotional regulation skills, their social skills. How, as educators, do we implement SEL in an effective way with this new generation of kids who are so online?
I have no idea. I mean, we are all facing this question, and it is, we, at dinner last night, we talked a lot about this. It is absolutely, I think, the frontier. So, I mean, I think, so when we look at those pandemic findings, we understand them in terms of a set of drivers. We haven't tested these drivers, but one driver is the stress and strain that came with the pandemic. Another driver is experiences of social isolation, because social emotional skills are built in interactions. The third driver, and perhaps the most dominant one, was the shift from all those other things to screens, right? And I don't think the screens have been withdrawn, right? There was like screen expansion, but not screen retraction as we've moved on from the pandemic. And so I don't really know. I think that there are research efforts that are brand new that are focused on whether or not things like cell phone bans in schools make a difference. And they're really like very vocal camps on either side of that question. I think the getting to the root of the issue is to ask oneself a question and try and operate from the answer to that question, which is like, what is the screen replacing? In a situation when the screen is replacing an interaction, we should rethink how that screen is being used. In a situation where the screen or whatever it is enhancing something that exists that is human and interactive, okay, maybe that's a deployable strategy that makes sense. But I think we just have to get back to the first principles. Human development hasn't changed. The foundations of what we know supports children's development, that has not changed. And so we have to think about the question of the screens in light of those things, those first principles. And the first principle is that high quality interactions are the drivers of human development at every stage. And so when we're thinking about the screens, we're worrying about when the screen is replacing those opportunities in the classroom, on the sports field, screens on the sports field, that sounds a little weird, but maybe, at home, in all of those learning settings.
Thank you.
Okay, no more. Thank you.
All right, we're taking a break for 15 minutes, and so get up, use the restroom, grab some refreshment, and we'll be back here in a few minutes to continue.
sliding it over might work. Let's see. Because
I'm gonna.
is there a way to go to the lag?
Slide over. Who picked that? Yeah, she wants the podium. She just wants. We'll just put you in the center and then slide this over to the side a little. And you'll be able to see it right there.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Can we go to the lab?
Here, you can drive.
That's my. No, probably not. I mean, do I need the podium? Oh, that would be nice. Do you have a lapel or a handheld mic or either of those? For a handheld, if you've got one? Sure. Okay, I can see this. I can see if I'm right here. No, I don't need the podium. This is swell.
she's going to introduce you. All right, we're going to get everybody back in their seats here. Okay, everybody, we're going to get started again. If you can make your way to your seats. We'll give them a minute. All right, everybody make your way to your seats. I love the time for networking, and then we always have to shut it down and bring you all back to attention. All right. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacinta, and I'm a 5th grader at St. Edward Catholic Schools. I'm here to introduce you to the second keynote speaker, Susan Verde. Susan Verde is a #1 New York Times best-selling and award-winning author and a yoga mindfulness expert. She has written over 20 books for children and adults, including all 9 in the New York Times best-selling I Am series, illustrated by Peter H. Reynolds. Her picture book, The Water Princess, was an ALA Notable Children's Book, Amazon's Best Book of the Month, and New York Public Library Best Book. Her nonfiction book for adults, Say One Kind Thing, is an original essay collection about the power of positive self-talk and her reflection on motherhood. Susan earned a bachelor's degree in elementary education and a master's degree in reading remediation and was an elementary school teacher for many years. She is now certified in yoga and mindfulness and teaches workshops for kids all ages. Susan currently lives in East Hampton, New York with her rescue dogs, 2 cats, and 3 children. Please join me in giving Susan a round of applause.
All right. Aha. Oh, it's working. Great. I am used to moving around because I talk to a lot of kids and, you're moving around. So I'm a little more comfortable with my handheld mic, if that's okay. And I don't have anything to refer to, so I could pretend, but I'm so excited to be here. I know, how many of you were here when Peter Reynolds came? Right, okay. And how many of you were here when I think I zoomed in? Oh, some returning, yay, that's exciting. So now I get to be here in person, which is so wonderful, and I feel like it makes more of an impact on me when I get to see your faces and talk to you about all these things. So I'm here, I'm kind of like maybe one of the tools or the support systems that Stephanie spoke about. I teach mindfulness and yoga to kids, and I write picture books. And I feel like I'm always saying that picture books are so good for any age because they take these big, difficult, important topics and they break them down and make them palatable for every age. And as you get older, you can pull more meaning and have deeper discussions from the simple words in a picture book. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about me and that and all that good stuff. So once again, being the tools of SEL. So mindfulness, when I started teaching yoga to kids in schools, there was a lot of fear. What am I teaching these kids? Am I teaching them this new language? Am I using Sanskrit? What am I doing exactly? So there was a lot of pushback, and we had to change our language a lot. We had to be very secular, of course, and also just begin to call it sort of healthy movement, right? Something like that. And then mindfulness became this thing that to me went sort of hand in hand, this awareness, this attention, and that is what began to show these sort of quantifiable results. And suddenly, yoga, as long as it was called mindful movement, and mindfulness became these things that were welcomed and embraced and now are, of course, everywhere, right? So it's been really, really wonderful to participate in that, to watch that, and to actually get to see how it affects kids, teachers, humans, classrooms, all of that. And I know you spoke of things like belly breathing, right? The simplicity of mindfulness. That's the thing I love about it. It doesn't have to be super complicated. You just have to do it and integrate it, right? And as the adults in the room, it also helps you, and then you get to be the model for kids. So I'm just, one of my favorite, I don't know, I'm gonna make you do this with me, sorry. Sorry. One of my favorite breath exercises that I do a lot when I'm visiting schools. So I visit a school as an author, the kids come into the auditorium or the library or wherever we are, and of course there's this concern that I can feel or I've heard about that the kids will behave, right? That they'll be quiet, that they won't fidget. And I know already that that's an impossible goal, and why are we focusing on that? It's okay, it's natural to move, it's natural to get distracted, all of those things. So I start with this because it's engaging, it also serves a purpose. Lion's breath helps you when you have a lot of energy and you need to get that energy out in a safe way. And it can also help you when you're low on energy and you need to build that. So I talk about that with the kids and then I make them do it. So here you go. So the first thing I say is, do you think this will be loud or soft? Loud, right? And then I, of course, give a little, if you don't like loud, you could put your hands over your ears, all of those kinds of things. And then, all right, here we go. Put your hands on your knees. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Stick out your tongue and roar. Oh, I'm gonna make you do it again. Hands on knees. Deep breath in through your nose. Stick out your tongue and roar. I know you can do better than that. One more time, hands on knees. Deep breath in through your nose. Stick out your tongue and roar. So you can imagine there are probably a lot of extended roars, roars that just go on and on and on and on. But eventually we stop. And I just ask them, sort of rhetorically, like, take a moment to notice how you feel. No right or wrong answer, it's just what it is, right? And then we go on to something quiet, which is heart and belly breathing, right? We've talked about belly breathing and how simple, deep breaths in through your nose can change your nervous system, can calm your nervous system, sending messages to your brain. And so we practice. So here we go. You can put one hand on your belly, one hand on your heart, and you can close your eyes. Now, some kids don't want to close their eyes because they've experienced some kind of trauma, they don't feel safe, or they just don't like it. So I always offer, if you don't want to close your eyes, totally okay. Just look at a spot in front of you so you're not worried about anyone else, because this is all about you. So hand on heart, hand on belly. When you breathe in, these are the places you can feel the air in your body. So close your eyes or look down. Take a deep breath in through your nose, and then very, very slowly blow the air out. We'll do that again. Breathe in through your nose. Slowly blow the air out. One more time. In through your nose. Slowly blow the air out. Take a moment to notice how you feel, and then you can open your eyes. I like to do this with kids because it's so interesting to see which kind of breath they gravitate towards, right? And you can see the changes in their bodies when they're doing things like this. Some won't participate. That's okay. They're attuning, they're seeing, they're watching, so maybe the next time you do it, they will, or they won't, and maybe the next time you do it, they will. There has to be that kind of flexibility in allowing them to choose to do that as opposed to being told you have to do this, right? If they understand the benefits, if they understand a little bit about the brain and all of those things and what these breaths do, it gives them a little more insight into why it might be good for them. So anyway, you've done your participation. You don't need to do any more, although maybe. So I'm Susan Verde. I am, as it says, a mother, an author, a teacher, and try to be a mindful human, although my children love to remind me when I am not being a mindful human. Yes, when I first started teaching mindfulness yoga, they would love saying things like, yeah, that's not very mindful, Mom. Like, why are you yelling at me? I'm like, shh, I don't have to be mindful at home. No, just kidding. And these are my children. They are my inspiration. I have twins who are now 22, and then a third who's 20. And the interesting thing is that they are all so different, and they all have their own challenges that have been, something that I've had to think about and approach them all differently, just like you would do in your classroom. It's kind of, you think, I don't know, I knew I wanted kids, but I had no idea that A, they would be so different from one another, and B, they would be so hard. It's so challenging. I was like, I was a classroom teacher in kindergarten, like I could do this, and it's like, whoa, a whole different thing. But that also has given me perspective and understanding of what sort of works, what doesn't, and I have been able to have the deeper communications with them as they've been going through these things than I might have been able to in the classroom. So, also, these are my pets. I just have to show them because they're so cute. These are my little rescues and my little old man, and of course, my cats. I always show these pictures to the kids. I also have a tarantula, which I like to show a photo of to the kids, and then they all scream like I've thrown it into the audience. It's very funny. But yeah. So really, I think, as I reflect, that all of this sort of started, all of this desire to think about the emotional, the social, the mental wellness of kids started with myself. I was a kid who worried a lot. I have some mild form of OCD. I have anxiety, like all the fun things. And when I was growing up, there wasn't the language to talk about that. So I kind of had to fend for myself, which might be the experience of some of you. And I kind of learned to shove it all down. But reading was something I really gravitated towards. It helped me so much. At the very least, get my mind off of things, find a place of peace, of focus. So books were really important to me. And I used to do some writing, but just, little poetry here and there or whatever. But the reading helped me escape in a way, but also find something or someone that was experiencing similar things, right? There wasn't enough of that back then. I talk like I'm 100 years old, but there really wasn't. It's over just the last, few years, maybe a decade or so, that there are more voices, there's more representation, there are more, timely situations that you can read about, which I'm so thankful for. So I was a kindergarten teacher for a long time, my little students. For some reason, I always had the classroom with the kids who had gone through some kind of trauma. I had some whose, parents had passed away in sort of terrible ways. I had some who were going through their own identity things and feelings and discovering that. It was a lot of different needs, but there was no SEL. There was no curriculum, program. There was nobody at the top, saying this is how we manage this and this is how we approach this. And if kids can't function or are too caught up in their trauma, in their difficulty, in their challenges, and they have no way out, they're not going to learn anything. So there was nothing like that. You were either the kind of teacher or school that sort of instinctively embraced that kind of thing, or you weren't. And you could have a school that did embrace that kind of thing, but have teachers within it who were like, this is nonsense, we need to get to the grades and But I think what the kids did for me was it made me sort of tap into my little self and be like, oh yeah, if this happened to me, I wouldn't be able to focus on reading and my letters and all the things. So I felt like I was able to be one of those educators who focused a lot on the social and emotional well-being of my students. I hope. I run into some of them now, and they're like getting married and whatever, and they seem pretty good, so maybe I did okay, I don't know. The mindfulness and the yoga I started doing just as I was leaving the classroom. I still wanted to be able to be there and give kids tools within the context of school, where you would have the most stress or the most need for this, where teachers would have the most need for this for themselves. And so, like I said, getting in there was a little tricky. But once there were numbers attached to everything, it became a little easier. I was very sad to have left the classroom, but I was trying to get pregnant, and it was a little more difficult than I thought, so I had to take some time off. But in that time, I developed these other skills that I knew I could eventually, hopefully, pass on to kids in the classroom. So I know that, I'm jumping a little all over the place, but I know that you are all big Peter Reynolds fans. So the reason I bring it up is because Peter is really the one who started me on this next path of writing. I was writing poems and little reflections about children and my own children and all of that. And suddenly I had this stack of stuff that I'd written. And I went to a friend of mine who is an author, and I said, what do I do with this? Should I do anything? And she said, she runs this, it still goes on in case anyone's interested. It's the Southampton Literature Conference. And every summer they have sessions for picture book writing and middle grade and all of that. And so she was like, take my picture book session, you'll learn a lot. So I did, and I did learn a lot. And the next summer, Peter was teaching the same, although differently, but the same class. And I was like, oh my God, I love him. I'm gonna go take his class. So one of the perks, well, I was actually supposed to be his assistant because I had been there before and I live in the area, and I was the absolute worst. Like, I showed up late, I left early, it was like, but so did he. So it all worked out. Don't tell him I said that. But yeah, so one of the perks was that he took your stuff and you got like 15 minutes alone, and he gave you his feedback. And in my stack of whatever, he pulled out this poem I had written called The Museum. And he said, this is a book, and I would like to illustrate it. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean? And he was like, no, seriously. So over the next 6 months, I worked on the text, and he did the sketches, and we put it together in a little dummy and sent it off to his agent, and she sold it in 2 weeks to Abrams Publishing, and suddenly she was my agent, and I was on this whole new path, which I knew nothing about, but was very exciting. But there's Peter. Love him. But the museum started out as one of these poems, and this is one of the things I talk to kids about too when they're struggling to write stories or get ideas. And it's these little things that are nothing that happen in your life, and you just start talking about them. I wrote this poem when I was in a museum with my son when he was about 5, and we were walking around, and he just lay down on the floor, and I was like, oh my God. And he said, Mom, I can't look at another painting of food, I'm starving. And so I started to write a little poem about it, and then we left and got snacks. But this was the poem. When I see art, I want to eat. I can't stand still or keep my seat. That ballet dancer, tall and lean, reminds me of a long string bean. That bowl of fruit looks very sweet. Those cherries would be quite a treat. That field of corn, those stacks of hay, I think I'm going to fade away. Those squiggles look just like spaghetti, and now my palms are getting sweaty. Feed me something you can choose. I'd even eat my new blue shoes. I really think I'm close to fainting. Don't show me another painting. Give me a snack before I pull out my hair. Yum, there's some gum under that chair. Gross. And from this, he saw a story. And this became my very first book, The Museum. And it was, not just about being hungry, seeing art and being hungry. It was when he said, go back and make it a story. And again, this was all very new to me, although I had used enough picture books in my classrooms and with my kids to sort of see how it flows. I once again sort of tapped into that emotional connection that I had experienced in my own life with art, and how art makes us feel all kinds of things and can inspire us. And so the story turned into a book about a girl going through a museum, and she sees all kinds of art, and things are happening to her mind and her body, and she ultimately stands in front of a blank canvas, and she's like, what is this? And she's kind of frustrated and weirded out, and then she closes her eyes, and she's like inspired by everything she's seen and felt in the museum, and realizes that that all lives inside of her, and she can express it in any way she wants on this blank canvas. So that's how it all sort of began. And that's us. Peter has his bookstore, I'm sure you know that, in Dedham, Massachusetts, so that's where our launch took place. We were posing as the thinker, if you didn't notice. So that was really what got me started. And then it sort of got me remembering and thinking, wow, books really do affect you. And there's a lot to talk about in this world. There's a lot to write about. There are kids who are going through things that we don't even know, and there's this need to kind of give them a way to notice and name what they're feeling, what they're going through, even if they don't know exactly, to notice maybe the physical feelings that are happening, right? Even if they don't have the words for, my stomach is all, they don't know that it's anxiety. On the other hand, it could be hunger, right? So you focus on that. Okay, my stomach feels funny, but wait, it's grumbling, and I'm a little tired, and yeah, I actually need to eat something. So then you make a choice to feed yourself, right? So it doesn't always have to be some big emotional thing, but if you're not paying attention, you don't know what you need, and you don't know how to ask for what you need. So that's sort of been kind of the focus of a lot of my writing. Most of my writing is that attention, and then the choices you can make when you're paying attention like that to yourself, and then how it expands and extends to others. So these are just a bunch of other books I've written. I have some for littles, specifically Can You See It and Are You Listening, which are really about paying attention, right, and seeing things in a different way. Like, you could be staring at a tree, but you could actually be seeing life, leaves, green leaves, and birds, and nests, and all kinds of things going on if you're really paying attention. And life has so many beautiful things to offer that stopping for that moment and taking that time can be life-changing. So I always talk about the many gifts of this writing journey. One is that I get to connect and reconnect with all of you. I had no idea when I started writing that this was somehow going to be a full circle and bring me back to the classroom, to the schools, to educators, to all of the amazing librarians and social workers and school psychologists that are there doing the work. And so I'm incredibly grateful for that. I get to see what's going on with kids. I get to talk to teachers about what they're going through, what they need. And I get to witness the brilliant things that they do with the books. Sometimes people will say, you know, do you have a teacher's guide? And yes, on my website, we have a bit of a teacher's guide. But my first response is, teachers do the most incredible things. So go look at their stuff. Like, go look at Teachers Pay Teachers or whatever it is, because you guys come up with the most amazing things to make connections and to activate the books. And then I've gotten to work with a lot of really wonderful illustrators and meet all kinds of kidlit creators and booksellers and people who are just getting books into the hands of kids is important to them. And then, you know, combining literacy and SEL and all of these things. I didn't, when I was writing, especially my I Am series, which, do some of you know the I Am series? So those I Am books, they started with a book called I Am Yoga, because my editor was like, well, you teach yoga, so why haven't you written a yoga book? And I was like, oh yeah. But when I wrote that book, I didn't want to make it an instructional book, right? Put your hand here, and you'll be a cat, or whatever it is. I wanted to capture how it made us feel, how it made the kids I taught feel, and what they could do with those feelings. You know, you could be in star pose and you can touch the sky, but what does that make you feel? You know, powerful, connected, or aware of your body, aware of where you are in space. Like, it's all of those things. So yes, in the back of the book there are instructions, but throughout the book it's really about what this powerful movement means to them, to you, and how you can use it to support yourself. And then of course from there I wrote I Am Peace, which is a book of mindfulness, because the two are connected. But then there's just so many things that needed to be talked about. Like, I was out to dinner with Peter and his young son at the time, and my daughter, and somebody knocked over a glass and was very upset about it. And, you know, Peter turned to one of them and said, it's no big deal, you're only human. And I was like, oh, oh, there you go. So I Am Human then was next, and it sort of became, it became the #1 New York Times bestseller. But it was an interesting process, because that was a book that we got a lot of pushback from our editor, who said that kids won't understand you're only human. They don't use that expression, they don't get it, like, it's too clunky, no one's gonna understand that. And I was like, no, you're so wrong about that. And what a wonderful way to teach them about it if they don't know, right? So whenever I did a school visit or I met with a teacher or librarian, I would bring my manuscript and I would have them read it and I would get their feedback, and they were like, every time, this can only be called I Am Human. Like, what, you can't call it. So Peter did the same, and we got all this feedback, and we were like, look, here, from the source, you know. And then we got to call it I Am Human, which was very exciting. But, and there are just so many, and you know, it's from there everything sort of blossomed. I wanted to call it I Am. I wanted to start with that, because I wanted kids and teachers and everyone reading these books to understand that they are all of these things. They have all of these things inside of them. It's just about accessing them, activating them, communicating about them, right? So I have been very, very honored to have a lot of the books be part of the SEL curriculum and school psychologists and all of that. Again, like this beautiful side effect that I didn't know would be a result, but it's. Oh, just a little update, a little plug. So I have a new book coming out. It's available for pre-order, called Sally B Says I'm Sorry. And the first one was Sally B Writes a Thank You Note. So these are co-written with another author, Courtney Scheinmel, but you know, we wanted again to give kids actual ways to show gratitude that aren't just things, right? Or be able to say I'm sorry without a but. And of course that makes them laugh too, but you know, not I'm sorry, but blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry you feel that way, but no. You know, really think about what that means, saying sorry and how it's hard sometimes. I think that was really inspired by lots of things going on where people are not taking accountability or saying sorry or any of that. And then the Water Princess, we talked about it a little bit earlier. This was a very special project with Peter and also a woman named Georgie Badiel who grew up in Burkina Faso and had to walk for water and then became a supermodel. And then once she had her platform, she sort of realized, like, I need to fix this problem. And so she started a foundation, and she's been building wells and giving water and training women in villages, giving them basic engineering skills and classes so that they can maintain the wells. Because a lot of problems with these organizations, they come, they build a well, it breaks, it's over. So that's been really exciting. And so we have a new one coming out. Yeah, so there's that, little plugs. So I really wanted to actually read to you. The latest, what we thought might be the last I Am, is sort of, although we are doing one more, is sort of this wonderful way to bring kids from, or people, humans from the self-care, which I also find a very triggering term, but until there's a better one, I'm not quite sure what to use. But that self-care to the caring for others. And how do we do that? And what does that look like? How do we keep our communities, build our communities? So I'm going to read you a story. I Am We, a book of community. And I think I might put my glasses on for this. Okay. Peter's art. He just always knew how to capture everything. I know it is important, actually I don't need these, to take care of me, to focus on my own breath, my own needs, to be kind to my mind. Sometimes I wonder, is that selfish? How does caring for myself help anyone else? But then I realize the better I feel inside, the more I can be there for others. What I like, I mean, it sounds a little self-important, but what I like about the books is, in my opinion, you can stop at any point and have a conversation. What does it mean to take care of my mind? What does that look like to you? You know, I might do blah, 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 and you might do whatever. So it gives the reader the opportunity, the teacher, the educator, to be the model, and also to start the conversations about bigger things. And you could put the book down and continue the next day. I just feel like you can chunk it, right, when you need to, depending on what your kids need, what your class needs. Anyway, we'll keep going. My friends, my family, my community, because I do not exist alone. I am part of something bigger than myself. And when we each take the goodness and self-compassion inside and turn it outward, that is how we make progress and change. How we build, create, learn, and show love. How we care for each other affects the world. I am more than me. I am we. And I find when I'm reading it, the kids will just suddenly be like, I am we, and reading along. But it's a wonderful sort of mantra, you know, to carry with you. Like, I'm not just me, I am we. When there are challenges and struggles, I can check on you. You can check on me. We can create a safety net so no one falls. When there is hurtfulness and inequity, we can stand up for each other. We can sit, gather, march, sing, vote, stronger in numbers, louder in voices as we call for justice. I have had a couple of, sadly, incidents where people didn't want to show up for the visit because of this particular page. When there are differences in thoughts and opinions, we can have a conversation, listening, disagreeing, and agreeing with gentleness, finding the right solution for all of us. When there is shyness and a feeling of not belonging, we can be the welcoming committee, interested and thoughtful, making sure there is a place for everyone. And this is where we talk about, we all feel this shyness or this sometimes nervous to sit at a table with someone new or, and you could be the one to welcome them in, to make them feel good and included. How amazing is that? When there are problems to be solved with creativity, I can share my talents and you can share yours. We can combine our skills and ideas to dream up something spectacular. And the kids always guess that this is some kind of goo or slime or something. When there are good times, successes, and joy, we can celebrate, show our excitement and pride, and encourage each other to keep on rising. Connection is how I grow. Connection is how we grow. Connected is what we are, part of a worldwide community, diverse and magnificent, kind and accepting, supportive and present, all of us important, none of us alone. I am not just me, I am we. And if we put our heads and our hearts together, if we keep on caring for ourselves and each other, everything is possible. And that's the end. I'm not going to make you do this, unless you really, really want to. But what I sometimes do with the kids, so we've had the breathing, we've had the reading, we've had all of that, but then to take this sort of physical interpretation of community and thinking about the times when you might need support and you might want to do something alone, and either way is okay. So we do 2 versions of tree pose, which is my ultimate favorite. So I have all the kids stand up and I bring some up with me, and we do regular tree pose. I walk them through the whole thing and they pay attention to their wobbly and their balance and all of that. And then I have them put hands together like this, which, as you can imagine, some kids do not want to touch each other's hands. But when they see everybody doing it, they pretty much all do it. And then, of course, it always helps when teachers jump in and do the same. And then we do the balancing, and we then have a conversation about, or even just I take a little poll, like raise your hand if you felt stable, like you could balance by yourself. And they raise their hand. Raise your hand if you felt like you could balance better with somebody else's help, leaning on someone else, which of course is all metaphorical. So then, I turn that into, sometimes we need help. Sometimes we can do it alone. But when we have this community where we're willing to help each other, when you need other people, they can be there, and they will be there, and you can do the same. So these are all choices you can make for yourself, to take care of yourself and to take care of others. So I'm not going to make you do that. But anyway, so that's really, I know it's been a little all over the place, but I really have, again, felt gratitude and honor to be able to support kids and adults in their emotional lives and feeling safe, in finding the words to express themselves, in finding each other
to support themselves. So it's really been great, and I just hope you guys keep on doing the things. I know you will. I know it's rough right now. One thing I always say, and Stephanie talked about it too, is that you are the model, right? You need the support. So if you are in your classroom and you are like, oh my God, it's a shit show in here. Sorry for cursing, but I know it's thoughts sometimes. I need to take 3 breaths, right? So you can say that. You know what, guys? This is too much for me. I'm going to step right over here and take 3 deep breaths. Anybody want to do it with me? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But you are showing that it is okay to take that moment and that you have something you can do in that moment to help yourself, right? And that says a lot to the kids who are watching you and spending time with you and looking up to you and emulating you. So that's really all I have for you today. I am doing a fireside chat in the next session, I think, right? Okay. Thank you all for having me.
Okay, now is time for transition. So we have a transition over to the Schindler Education Center from here, and those of you who've been here before know the way, but just follow the crowd, right? Just follow the crowd. First, I want to say thank you to Susan and Stephanie for being here today. It was absolutely wonderful. Let's give them another round of applause. Thank you so much. I think this is one of the things that I love most about our conference is this intermixing of research and practice and literacy and tools, and it fills my heart with joy every year. So a couple of announcements as we move over. There is a very limited time for book signing with Susan, so if you want your book signed, make it a priority before or during lunch, okay? So get books and head to that space. If you are collecting social work CEUs, they will be handed out at the end of the event, and that will be in Schindler Lobby, so you can find that. Another great thing that we're doing today that's new this year is our health education students are working to set up walking labyrinths for us to enjoy during lunch and at other times of the time moving forward this afternoon. And there's weather things potentially happening, wind, storms that are coming. So, and it's wet outside still from the morning dew. And so we're hoping to set those up sort of around Schindler, maybe just right outside of Schindler. So we'll be announcing that, and there'll be people pointing you in the directions for those walking labyrinths. We wanted it to be outside on the grass, but it's wet. And so now we can transition to our day. We have so many excellent breakout sessions planned. Find something you love, and I will see you over in Schindler.